Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the next installation in the Sustainable Resource Committee's presentations. Last month, we had a presentation by our distinguished speaker, Damaris Tebuk. She spoke to us about the indigenous perspective on sustainability, and we were all enlightened by that talk, by her sharing her knowledge and experience in this field. And today we're lucky to have someone to talk to us about wild mushroom foraging. That promises to be very interesting and probably tasty. So can we go to the next slide? Yeah, this series of talks is sponsored by the Sustainable Resource Committee, which is a committee of the Baha'is of Northeast King County. The goal of this committee is to promote sustainability within our local area and promote it in a way that is going to survive far into the future, not just for the next month or 6 months. And this involves the building of relationships with people who are like-minded, who are supportive of this goal, and who want to work with us to make this something that is recognized in our area. So we're very happy to provide this series of talks to provide information about sustainability from multiple different perspectives. And tonight I'm going to ask Charlotte Fiker to introduce our speaker for this evening. So Charlotte, take it away.
Erwin is a lover of all things nature. Love for mycology started over a decade ago when he completed his degree in horticulture and noticed the large interaction between the fungal world and the plants that he was studying. This quickly flourished into a full-blown obsession to learn more about the mycological world. Matthew read book after book on identification and the roles fungus plays in our ecosystem. He started cultivating mushrooms at home for fun and reconnected through a gardening group with an old high school acquaintance who started his own gourmet mushroom farm in Duvall. Matthew went on to start his own business specializing in pruning for the health of the plants, designing and installing flower and vegetable gardens, and giving mushroom identification and foraging classes in the spring and fall. Matthew also has a business making wooden bowls and other pieces of art from the trees he prunes and the stones he collects. Matthew enjoys a plethora of hobbies with his wife of 12 years, such as gardening, rock hounding, foraging, hiking, kayaking, spending time in nature, and most recently, gold panning. And now I'd like to introduce to you our speaker. We're very happy and anxious to hear what he has to tell us. Matthew Erwin.
Thank you, Charlotte. Okay, let's share the screen. Nope. Did that work? Share screen. Okay. I'm new to this, so is that button? Nope. That button? Nope. That button. Okay, let's go. So I'm Matt. I kind of fell in love with mushroom identification, not necessarily culinary specific. I enjoy identifying things. I've always had a desire to learn more about what was around me. That's why I got a degree in horticulture. I didn't know the plants and I've studied them on my own. And once I saw this relationship, it kind of became a rabbit hole. And people get overwhelmed when it comes to identifying mushrooms, when in reality, it's pretty simple if you just pay attention to the small details. For example, the first thing you do when you're trying to identify a mushroom is you look at the cap. Then you look at the stem, the reproductive structures, which are gills or other structures I'll go over. Habitat, smell. Every mushroom has its own unique smell, and some of them really helps in identifying them. Taste, and then also doing a spore print, which I'll teach you how to do. So caps, main purpose is just to protect the spore producing tissue. Come in all shapes and sizes. The chanterelles, funnel shape, cylindrical, like the shaggy mane. A lot of the, we'll call them button mushrooms, but agaricus mushrooms are flat topped. Morels have a slightly pitted and unique spore producing capability. These mushrooms smell like cucumbers, but they're bell-shaped, woolly, knob, and scaly and shaggy. All of these mushrooms were found locally except for the morels. I did all the pictures. So when I say identifying mushrooms is based on paying attention to details, you just have to know what you're looking at. You have to know the difference between a convex shape or a bell-shaped. And that's where you start. You start with the cap and then the stem. The stem's whole purpose is to support the cap to protect the spores. Just like the caps, they come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes. And it really helps to pay attention to all of this as a whole. It can make a difference between picking a poisonous amanita versus something else if you just pay attention to the stem. Again, all sorts of different shapes and sizes. Some mushrooms are even rooted. My favorite cauliflower mushroom has a taproot that can be up to 3 feet long. Pretty massive root. Amanitas, which are poisonous, have a little cup. So probably the most important, I think, characteristic you have to understand about mushrooms is their reproduction and their spore producing tissue. A lot of people might look at this and think, oh, it's a gilled mushroom because it has these what look like gills. But when you cut it in half, you will actually see that they're just folds in the tissue. So when you're identifying stuff, which I'll teach you is really easy to do, knowing that these are folds and not gills makes a huge difference when it comes to identification. Lion's mane is considered a toothed fungus. This is Arascalpium vulgare, which is a very tiny mushroom that only grows on pine cones of the Douglas fir tree. And then you got your coral-shaped mushrooms. Your cup fungus. This was found at the Redmond watershed. This is called a bird's nest mushroom. It's not edible, but it's nice to know and respect. It's beautiful and looks like a little tiny bird's nest. Some mushrooms have pores, like the bolete family, and we have quite a few edible boletes in our area and in eastern Washington. This is a baby chicken of the woods, Laetiporus cuneiforcola. It also has pores, and you can kind of see that. A gill, if there's one thing you take away from this, a gill is a paper thin section of tissue. It's not a fold. When you cut it, it's just paper thin. They can be a little bit bigger. Like this, the shiitake you can see is very thin. Oyster mushroom, very thin. Honey mushroom, very thin. These ones here on another local edible mushroom, Pileus, they look really thick at first, but when you cut them, you will see that it's not a fold in the tissue. It's actually a thin structure. So if you're paying attention to the cap shape, the stem shape, and the gills, you can identify things pretty easily, at least to their family, which, if we all remember King's Play Chest on Fine Grained Sand, the kingdom, was it kingdom phylum? But anyways, the family is the easiest to identify too. You also have to pay attention to whether or not the gills attach to the stem, or if they attach to the cap, how far apart they are, if they're crowded, or if they're decurrent. A couple of our most popular edible mushrooms, the chanterelle and the oyster mushroom, both have decurrent gills. And you can see that they're going down the side of the mushroom. That's a very important mushroom identification feature for those. This is just a microscopic. I got really into doing microscopic photography, and this is just a very thin, you can see each individual gill off of, I think it was a honey mushroom. So smell every mushroom, because every mushroom has its own unique smell. I kind of live my life by the smell everything. Like I mentioned earlier, these smell like cucumber. There's no other mushroom that I can think of that smells like a cucumber. They're not necessarily edible, but you can identify it. Truffles, of course, are highly prized. These were both found at the Redmond watershed. So you don't have to, you just have to know what you're looking for. They're all around us. And I work at a mushroom farm with my buddy still. And one of the employees, Richard, asked me, how do I find all this stuff and see all these amazing things? And it clicked in my mind that you have to keep a childlike wonderment, no matter how old you are. Go into the forest as if it's your first time. Look for things that look slightly out of place or look interesting, and go investigate. Every time you go to a rock and look at, or to a river to look at rocks, you know, see the sparkly ones or the pretty ones. It's all about having that childlike mentality of everything being fresh and everything being new. I never get sick and tired of smelling the cucumber mushrooms. Each time I pretend it's the first time. And this one here is one of my favorite mushrooms that can be found this time of year. This is the Prince Agaricus. It is very easy to identify because it smells like almonds. You scratch the cap a little bit and it will have a very strong almond aroma to it. It also has kind of a shaggy stem, so we're paying attention to the stem shape. And then it has a ring an annulus or a ring that it holds on to, which isn't as impressive as the smell because the ring can get worn away with the water. This is a Clitosity nuda, or the bluet. They smell like orange juice concentrate, like freshly opened can of orange juice concentrate. They're an edible mushroom. If you look at their gills don't quite attach to the stem. So when identifying a mushroom like this, that's why it's important. That's a key characteristic of this mushroom, is that they are free gills and they're not necessarily attached. This one I love. Smell everything. This is a stinkhorn. There's a ton of them in the Redmond watershed. It kind of smells like dog poo, but it's something you still have to experience. The first time I found it, I was so excited to smell it. I accidentally brushed it against my nose, and that aroma stuck with me for quite a long time. But still, it's worth the smell. It's a fascinating type of mushroom. Okay, and one of the things I said was taste. It needs to be very clear that taste does not mean eat. The sensation of flavor perceived in the mouth and throat on contact with the substance. I have put in the deadliest mushrooms around in my mouth, on my tongue, chewed a little bit and spit it out. You can't poison yourself if you're just tasting a mushroom and spitting it out. I think people do it with wine too, right? Or beer, where you drink a sip and then you spit it out. Don't consume it, just taste it. With certain lactarius mushrooms, it's really important because they will have a really strong peppery taste to them, and that will help you distinguish it between one that is edible and one that is not edible. A very peppery flavor. It can take a small nibble and spit it out, because it could even burn your mouth like it did mine. This is a microscopic view of the gills. These are all spores. I'm not going to get deep into this other than just to see there's millions of these upon. This is just one blade of a gill, and it is covered with these. They're called basidium, and these are where the spores are produced. This is a slightly different. If you really want to get into identifying mushrooms for fun because you want to learn more, this is a handy feature that a guy created a program just for mushroom identification through microscopic, and this shows you the way that the cell structure is aligned, because when you're getting into trying to differentiate two mushrooms of the same genus that are very similar and you can only do it microscopically, sometimes you have to look at the cellular level. For the most part, the ones that we eat, we don't need to get that deep into identification. That's just more if you want to get really obsessed and enter a whole new world. This is what the basidia looks like up close. It looks like a little alien spaceship. And the first time I saw this, I fell in love. I looked at every single mushroom I could find under the microscope to see the different spore producing. Yeah, you get lost. You can spend hours upon hours. So the next thing you do for identification is a spore print. A spore print is basically you cut the cap off of the mushroom, you put it onto a surface. I like aluminum foil or glass because some spore prints are white and they don't show up on paper. But spore color is one of the things that the field guides will ask you, and they will drop a lot of spores. This is white from this one down here. This Pileus is the kind of rusty brown color. A lot of spores. This is one of our local boletes. Yeah, so when you get into the books I'm going to show you, they're going to ask you spore color. If you're trying to really have fun with it, they might ask you spore shape. Then you can go into your microscope. These are spores. I used to collect oyster mushrooms, and I would take the spores and put them on an old, the caps, put them on an old window, let the spores drop, scrape them off with a razor blade, and then mix them with vegetable oil and use that in my chainsaw. And I would inoculate hardwood logs that way to encourage, you know, the growing of oyster mushrooms at home. So spore shape, just like the basidia, it gets really, really fun and fascinating. But it's a whole nother level. You can see in some mushrooms, they form in these little sacs, and the amount of spores that are forming will determine what the species or subspecies of it actually is. That's not really needed. This is a tardigrade. I threw him in here because I forgot about him. I was looking at some gills one day, and he was in between a couple gills, and he was just a fascinating, beautiful creature to behold. So spores germinate like a seed, and it produces mycelium. Mycelium is not necessarily used very often in the identification of mushrooms, but for growing your own mushrooms, you kind of need to know how it works. It grows radially, so it will grow in a circle. Some species of mushrooms, like oyster mushrooms and King stropharia that people are growing in their gardens, you can take just a little stem butt, and that's what this is here, is just a stem butt that I cut and sandwiched between two pieces of wet cardboard. And the mycelium within a week started growing like crazy. I used to do quite a bit of tissue cultures of mushrooms at the Snow Valley Mushrooms, where I work part-time. I haven't done too much lately. And then I just thought I'd show a microscopic picture of the mycelium, because mycelium in itself is only one cell wall thick. It's another fascinating thing to get into. Resources, books. There are tons of books out there. I really do like All That the Rain Promises and More. It's a great beginner's book. It focuses on the mushrooms that are really easily identified, but it didn't give me what I desired as far as a deeper knowledge. If you want to start doing this and are serious about learning mushrooms, join a club. There's the Puget Sound Mycological Society, which I was a member of for a while, and then I switched to the Snohomish County Mycological Society. There's tons of people out there with a world more knowledge than me, and it's fun. Last year I went to the PSMS Wild Foray they hold in the fall, which they should be doing. They won't be doing this year, but it's just fascinating to see. They bring in mushrooms. If you've never been there, they bring in soil and mushrooms with identification cards on every one of them in different growth stages. It is great. The Bible is Mushrooms Demystified by the same guy that did all the Dream Promises more, David Aurora. I love this book because it has taught me the most, because of the way it is, the way you, the procedure in which you come to a conclusion is by using a dichotomous key, which I'm going to show you next. Anybody can use a dichotomous key. It is really simple. Yeah. And then, of course, you can contact me. I do mushroom identification classes. I've done them for students, college students. I even did a children mushroom identification class based on just like looking at mushrooms. They were pretty young kids. There was no talk about edible mushrooms. So dichotomous keys are my favorite thing in the entire world. You use them in identifying everything. It's basically a choose your adventure book. It's really important to not try and make something fit where it doesn't belong. You want to get away from the habit of, oh yeah, this could be this, but I'm not 100% sure, but I'm just gonna say that it is. You have to be positive at what it is before you move on. But it does, it gives you couplets. It gives you two choices. The mushroom's small, under 1 inch. Well, this is a sword fern, and the sword fern fronds are pretty long, so it's definitely over 1 inch. It'll move you on to the next thing. We already discussed that these are not actual gills on the chanterelle. They are folds in the tissue, and when you cut it, you can tell that. They're blunt and they're forked. Up top especially, you can see the forking, which moves you to sometimes color. It's obviously a yellow color. It's funnel shaped. It is, it's like those choose your adventure things. Gills white. The gills are not white. Gills decurrent. Like the oyster mushroom, the gills of the chanterelle actually continue down part of the stem. And then, is it blue or is it bright yellow to orange? And that gives you your answer. That is mushroom stem mystified in a nutshell. It is, once you can understand mushroom families and get your mushroom into a family, you can work through a dichotomous key and have great success with identifying almost everything. The hard ones are called LBMs, and they're the little brown mushrooms that you see in the yard. But as far as like the edibles, the chanterelles, the oysters, the cauliflower mushrooms, those all are so easily identified through just simple questions. I believe 100% in scientific names. The second option for this was Polyzelos multiplex, which is the blue chanterelle. I've now found it down at Mount Rainier, but not up in this area. It's not really a chanterelle, but they call it that. And then Camptorellus formosa. We have a couple species of chanterelles up here, but formosa is the one that we go with. The reason that the binomial names are so important is because they're not just a name, they're actually a description. If I say blue chanterelle, somebody, it's like marigold. There are 4 or 5 different marigolds, but they all have different Latin names. You want to make sure that you're looking at the right marigold. They also tell a story. Polyzelos multiplex means multiple bodies with many folds. Camptorellus formosa, a large drinking vessel that is beautiful. Learning your scientific names is definitely a must if you're going to be identifying. There's a lot of difficulty in how do you pronounce something with this. They get kind of weird and hard to actually say. I was taught in college when I was learning plant identification that you say it with confidence and nobody's going to question you. So that's what I've done is I could be pronouncing it wrong because I haven't taken Latin or Greek. But still, if you look at the etymology of the words, it's super beneficial because it's more often than not a descriptive key to the mushroom itself. Sometimes it's just people's last names because they want something named after themselves. So another really important thing is you need to know the growth. You need to know if your mushroom is a saprophyte, which is just a mushroom that grows on dead, decaying organic matter. This can be forest duff. This could be dead branches or logs. But it has to be dead already. It's not a parasite, so it won't kill things. Lion's mane is not truly a parasite. This is Hericium, and it grows on dead logs. Mount Pilchuck is a great place to go looking for these, the Mountain Loop Highway. A parasite kills and consumes a living host. I love this mushroom because there are 9 subspecies of honey mushrooms in the Pacific Northwest, and I've microscopically identified, I think, like 8 of them. There's still one that I haven't found. But this is Armillaria oceae. Knowing that it's a parasite tells you need to look at the tree. You need to look at living trees that are suffering. So looking into the canopy of the tree and seeing if it's missing branches or needles or there's decay in it. This is on the Redmond watershed. If you hit the Redmond watershed at the right time, these go 8 feet up the side of quite a few of the trees. On the frog loop, the little tiny loop right there on Novelty. There's another type of parasite, which is a parasite of a mushroom itself. These are mushrooms that I've cultivated at home. I have a patch of Russula, which does not look like this at all. It's a white mushroom, has no flavor, it's not desirable. But I took a lobster mushroom, I collected the spores, and then I spread the spores around this patch of Russulas. And for the past 3 years, I've been harvesting 40, 50 pounds of lobster mushrooms. And I've been sprinkling the spores other places. This is the only parasite of a mushroom that we consume. There is a green version, but I think that's a little more East Coast. Lobster mushrooms, again, very easy to key out. They don't even have gills. They completely change the way that the mushroom grows, and they can be massive. I've picked a couple that have been at least 2 pounds. Cauliflower, the mushroom that was in the beginning photo, they're all my all-time favorites, but this mushroom was especially meaningful to me. My wife and I went on a trip out Highway 2. We stopped at a campsite, and there was this 33-pound cauliflower mushroom at the base of an old growth Douglas fir. Knowing that it's a parasite, I know that this tree here, which is a massive Douglas fir, is on its way out. And it tells me where to look. I looked up at the tree canopies when we got to the campsite, and I saw that this one was missing its top. and I started poking around the base of it, and there this was. So knowing whether it grows on dead wood versus if it's a parasite, it normally grows on the buttress of the tree, which is the root system up about 2 to 3 feet on the trunk. That's where most parasites go for the trees. And then you have your symbiotic. There are a lot of mushrooms out there that have relationships with plants. And a lot of the people have difficulty finding chanterelles, when in reality, you just need to know the habitat and you will find them because they're everywhere, everywhere in the Pacific Northwest. A lot of mushrooms have relationship with trees. Amanitas have relationships with all sorts of trees, oaks, conifers. So you need to know your habitats. Trees and plant species, because I am a nerd, I think if you want to start identifying mushrooms on a level where you want to actually consume them, you should learn your trees. And a pet peeve of mine is somebody pointing at a Douglas fir and saying, oh, that pine tree. Well, we only have white pine trees around here, and they're very uncommon. So knowing the difference between a Douglas fir and a hemlock, knowing what our native ground covers are, like salal, Oregon grape, it's important to know what habitat you're going to be looking at. Elevation, I don't really pay that much attention to. I know that if I'm finding lion's mane, I've gone up high enough. The only time elevation really comes into play for me is during morel season, because the later in the season you go higher up the hillsides because it's still cooler up there. So if you're out looking for morels at a low elevation and not finding them, or finding old dried ones, if you start going up the hill, you'll have more luck. And then orientation, north, south, east, and west. North facing, northeast facing, northeast, northwest facing slopes tend to be more productive with having the afternoon shade. Like, even though it's not a plant and it's a mushroom, but like most plants, most mushrooms prefer not to have the hot afternoon sun baking down on them. So just knowing your surroundings. I think the most important is the trees and plant species, because you need to know what's around you where you live. So chanterelle tips and tricks. Chanterelle has a symbiotic relationship with Douglas fir. It also mildly has a relationship with hemlocks, but I more commonly find it with the Douglas fir. To identify a Douglas fir tree, you look at its pine cone, which it's actually a fir cone. But you look at it and it looks like a little mouse's butt trying to crawl up into the cone. And that's only ever seen on the Douglas fir. So if you see pine cones on the ground have that, you know you're around a Douglas fir. It's also got the really sappy, deep furrow bark around here. So chanterelles are one of those interesting mushrooms that actually have to have a relationship with multiple things in order to grow in a certain area. There needs to be salal or sword fern or a second relationship. So if you're in a Douglas fir forest, you see salal, which salal is very easy to identify. Big leathery oval leaves. In the stem of salal zigzags. And sword ferns, everybody knows a sword fern. But if you're in a middle-aged forest with all of these, you're gonna find chanterelles. It's just a matter of time. Then, yeah, we talked already about the fact, this is just a better picture of the forked ridges of the chanterelle, which is really important. I'm not going to go into lookalikes because I'm telling you it's more important than to know the lookalikes, to know how to be diligent and actually know what you're doing. The only lookalikes for chanterelles have gills. So the first thing I taught you about these not being gills and how to check if they are, immediately you can't mistake a chanterelle for anything else unless you're being careless. Morels are easy to find. Go to Eastern Washington. Very seldom do you see them on this side of the mountain. A lot of the times people picking morels are actually picking burpas, which I have not eaten, but my grandma used to eat them, and I have some friends in wilderness awareness that eat them. In all the books, it says that they give mild digestive upset. I prefer the more prolific way of finding morels, and that's wherever there is a massive forest fire right now, go there next spring. Be safe, because there's a lot of trees that can fall down on you. There's holes from roots being burnt out. A lady that I used to take my mushrooms to help me in the beginning stages of identification, Hildegard, actually out at this place with my little sister, went missing and she was never found. So you have to be careful when you're out in the woods, especially a burnt forest like this. But if you go to a burning forest on the east side of the mountains next year at the right time, when is the right time? When the trilliums are blooming or the calypso orchids are blooming. There is no right time. It's just every year it's different. It all depends on temperature, rain, humidity. I don't get that much into it because I like the adventure. So I go over and hopefully find some. And if I do, I go back quite frequently. This place here, we picked, I think, somewhere around like 80 pounds. I went there like 4 times. I got my commercial mushroom pickers. I guess that is something you should know. You're only allowed 1 5-gallon bucket a day for personal consumption of mushrooms. I believe anything over a 5-gallon bucket, you have to have a commercial reseller's license for mushrooms. And you're supposed to cut every mushroom that you're going to consume in half so that way they know you're not selling it. I've only been asked once in all the time that I've been picking mushrooms. I don't think it's a big deal.
I believe that's typically on Forest Service ground.
Yeah, that's Forest Service ground. There's rules and regulations based off of every Forest Service, national forest, state, county property. There's different regulations on where you can and can't pick. And I always just call it whatever local ranger station is in the area. And most of the time I have a good chat with people. And they'll tell me, yeah, I've been picking morels, and then I head over there. And yeah, morels, if you're just going for the fire morels, super, super easy. Now, for avoiding, amanitas are very easy to learn because they're the Alice in Wonderland. Most of the time they're red or yellow with big white patches on them. I'll go a little bit into what those white patches are. Some mushrooms have a veil that covers, I think even button mushrooms at the store do. They do. Portobellas have that veil covering their gills. That's to protect the spores until they mature. So the Amanita's veil breaks apart and sticks to the top. And then it also produces a ring on the mushroom, which none of these have. I think the next picture does. Amanitas are more advanced if you're going for consumption. This is actually Amanita vaginata, and it's edible and choice, and it actually tastes pretty good, and it grows in my backyard. But that's more advanced identification, like really paying attention to the gills, the cap, the stem, this little cup that all Amanitas grow out of. I would avoid eating Amanitas. This is the veil that breaks apart and leaves that ring. These are all at the Redmond watershed. They can be quite beautiful. Amanita is just a genus to steer away from, but to admire. It's a beautiful group of mushrooms. That woolly white one I found at the Redmond watershed. I go there a lot, if you can't tell. And that's Amanita smithiana, and it's pretty unique in the area. You don't really come across it very often. It's not edible. It's unknown about its edibility, so I steer clear of things like that. Oyster mushrooms are probably another one of those like really easy, basic beginner mushrooms. They are always going to be growing off of a hardwood tree. Hardwood trees don't mean that the wood inside the tree are hard. They mean that they are either deciduous and lose their leaves, or have leaves but are evergreen. Like camellias would be considered a hardwood. Maples are a hardwood. Alders are a hardwood. Cottonwood, believe it or not, is a hardwood because it loses its leaves. These were found on cottonwood. This is one of the most aggressive species of mushrooms out there. It will fruit in large numbers. There's a place in Carnation where you could go pick hundreds of pounds of it right outside of an old golf course. That's where this photo is taken from. But oyster mushrooms typically, not always, but typically, more often than not, grow out of the side of the tree, and they have decurrent gills. They don't have a stem. They don't really have a stem when you look at it. They have a tiny stem and it's lateral, but they don't have a clear spot where the gills stop. You can see the gills go all the way down to where the stem would be. So they're decurrent gills. Very easy beginner mushroom. The only lookalike is angel wings, but if you were to key them out, you would quickly realize angel wings are pure white to translucent in color. Angel wings prefer conifers or softwoods. So this is another one of those safe ones. It's kind of funny. All of the really easy, safe ones to eat are cultivated. Snow Valley mushroom grows a variety of oysters and lion's mane. I find that fascinating. I already talked about the Sporaceous, the cauliflower mushroom. I think this is my all-time, I love it. When you put your nose in there, it's got this like bacony cooking aroma to it. It's an interesting musk aroma that's just so pleasing. You can actually find it. I found a couple over like 200 feet away just because I could smell in the forest that there was a cauliflower mushroom growing somewhere. Very easy to identify. Nothing else looks like that in our area. It looks like somebody poured egg noodles out. In fact, that's how it's described in one of the books. Chicken of the woods is another easy beginner one. It's in All That the Rain Promises and More. This is just down the road, I don't know, 300, 400 feet away from where I'm sitting right now, taken a couple days ago. When you're reading the books, you will see a slight caution against eating chicken of the woods growing out of hemlocks. Something about the hemlock canyons in the woods reacts with the mushroom and causes people to have digestive upset, but not everybody gets digestive upset. But that's where knowing your tree species really comes in handy. This is not deep furrowed bark like the Douglas fir that we saw earlier with the chanterelles. The only other conifer that we really have around here is the western hemlock. So I know that these are grown out of western hemlock and I probably don't want to eat them. And I will hurry up because I realize I'm 47 minutes already. Honey mushrooms I talked about earlier. Honey mushrooms are a little bit more advanced with the identification, but keying them out is so simple. Their stems pull apart like string cheese, but the most important identifying characteristic of this is it has a special type of mycelium. If you were to pull those mushrooms out of that tree, you would see a long black string. It's a mycelium bundle called a rhizomorph in all honey mushrooms, which taste really good. We eat them frequently. They have black shoestring rhizomorphs is what they're called. And then Pseudohydnum gelatinosum. This can be candied. I've done it a couple times. It's called the jelly tooth mushroom. Super easy to identify. It grows on rotting conifer wood. There's no caution with it. You can't really cook with it because, as its name says, it's pretty gelatinous. But you can soak it in fruit juice and then dehydrate it till it's crispy and make like a candy-ish treat. For medicinal purposes, our native reishi, Ganoderma organensis, these were taken at the Redmond watershed. It looks like candy corn, and it's very, very shiny. There's no other mushroom that looks like this. If you're into drinking tea, I drink mushroom tea pretty much daily. Easy beginner identification. This Lepiota is pretty easy to identify. It's really shaggy. It's got an annulus. It's got a ring on it. Its stem turns red when it's bruised. And when you do a spore print, it has white spores. There are tons of Lepiotas in the area, and this jumps around every few years from different genres of mushrooms. But it has white spores. That's the most important thing. The only poisonous lookalikes for that one have dark, like brown to greenish spores. That's why I say it's a really easy one to identify. This one you'll find everywhere. Farrell McWhirter Park in Redmond, the watershed. It grows on the forest edge. If you look at the habitat, you can see maple leaves from our big leaf maple, and you can see cedar. So that kind of tells you where to look in a really duffy area. Talked about lobster mushrooms. I find lobster mushrooms with hemlock, typically, because that's where I find more rusculus. So slightly higher elevation. Up in the North Bend area, you can really clean up on some of those trails out there. Mount Si, Little Si, Rattlesnake, all those areas up there have tons of lobsters, and they're just about to start popping. Down here, where my patch is, always starts early, same with my chanterelle patch. And then later on, we go on our excursions further away when we know there's going to be a lot more stuff out. Lion's Mane, it looks like a beautiful waterfall coming out of the side of the log. You can't mistake that. There's nothing that looks like it. Gomphidius glutinosus, you can see the slime. I've eaten it once. It's marked edible. It wasn't anything special. You have to peel the slime off it before you cook it. But to identify it, it's got a yellow base to the stem. So when you pull out the mushroom, it's got this yellow, beautiful base. Very easy to identify. The Agaricus augustus, the prince mushroom, all one would have to do is scratch that top and it would smell like almonds. Shaggy manes are another very easy identifiable mushroom. They're torpedo shaped. They are white and shaggy, and they liquefy. There's caution with certain species of drinking alcohol and consuming these mushrooms. I just find that kind of a rule with any new mushroom that's being tried, no alcohol mixed with the mushroom, because people have had allergic reactions to chanterelles when they've been drinking, or what I really think it is people just eating stuff a little bit past their prime. Easy to remember families. I'm just going to go through a few of my favorite. Lactarius mushrooms is very easy to remember because the gills bleed. You give it a little slice on the gills and it will bleed a different color sap, which will let you know which species it is. Some of it's orange, some come out blue, it's white, milky. Russulas, there's the shrimp russula, which is the only edible one, but there's a lot of russulas around. They're very brittle, and if you pick it up and you bend the stem, it will snap like a piece of chalk. Cortinarius, an advanced mushroom for culinary use, the gypsy mushroom they call it. Instead of having that veil that protects the gills, it has a cobweb. It almost looks like a spider has crawled and made a nest. Talked about the amanitas. They have the veiled patches, and that little cup on the bottom is called the vulva. Ramarias look like coral. Boletes have circular pores. Pretty simple to remember. Suilises, which are in the bolete family, have hexagon pores. So my reason for giving you this little list is just to show you that if you go out to the Redmond watershed and you find a mushroom that has hexagon pores, that's all it takes to get to the genus. And then from there, using the right field guides, you can key out your mushroom very easily. It sometimes comes down to, oh, you need a microscope to look at the spore structure to differentiate between subspecies. But just having these little tips and tricks to remember what things are and get you to the family, that's the most important thing, is just getting you to the family of the mushroom, and then you can identify it from there. The chanterelles, the false gills. Mycelium looks like a waterfall. Pleurotus, which is the oyster mushroom, shelf-like with the current gills. The honey mushroom, Armillaria, has the black shoestring mycelium, or rhizomorphs. And then the egg noodle-looking cauliflower mushroom. This might look familiar to at least one of you, Charlotte. This is at the end of my slide. I get to talk about the rest of my life really quickly. I install landscapes. I try to do sustainable, low maintenance landscapes. Charlotte let me do this her front entryway, and I turned out beautifully, if you ask me. I loved it this year. I also do pruning. I specialize in fruit trees and pruning for the health of the tree is really important to me. Building a relationship with the nature and then going in and just hacking something without thought bothers me, and a lot of landscape companies do that. I actually do what the tree wants instead of what the client really wants. I try and blend them if possible, but I care a little bit more about the trees because they're gonna be there a little bit longer. I also do woodworking, which this here is my wife and mine. We share a favorite wood, and that's anything spalted. This is spalted maple. Spalted is fungus growing through this wood. So this maple tree I had to take down because it was dead. And these black lines are where two competitor fungi mixed, and it creates this delineation between them. This is actually a picture of an akatake, which is a delicious winter mushroom you can find. This is a block in my shop that I turned into something, but you could see that I was fine with letting it grow on the wood. And then here's some spalted birch from some sick trees that I had to take down for clients in Duvall. But just to show you, like, mushrooms and trees and I don't know, just everything in nature goes together if people just pay attention. And then this is spalted contorted hazelnut. A lot of people have them as ornamental trees, but their spalting is different. There's white rot versus the black and yellowish rots. Contact information is all right there. Both my emails, my phone number. Turn Forest is the name of my wood art, I like to call it. Nature art, because I'm doing a lot of stuff with stone lately too. But yeah, that's it. That's my crash course into mushroom identification.
Thank you so much, Matthew. We were very, very enlightened by this talk. You give us something to look forward to in our next walk in the woods. So we can now open the floor to questions. I would like to make a one or two announcements first. We're doing this sustainable talk every month, and we record the talks. And if you missed it or a friend of yours wasn't able to catch the talk, it will be available on YouTube for you to watch again. I will grab, I guess we can leave this slide up. Or I will capture this information and put it in the chat window, and we can talk with everyone.
Yeah, I can right there. Stop.
I already captured this. You can unshare now if you
want. Okay, perfect. There's that. Yep.
And then, so let's go away. So if you want to ask a question, please either raise your hand, physically, or click the button, or type your question in the chat window, and we can address your question. Thank you so much.
I only see two people.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of, there's like 2 pages. So
it's hard to see. Yeah.
So you can just unmute yourself and speak. That would also be acceptable.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the chat. Okay, there's a question from Nadia Oaks. Why do you think the Redmond watershed has so many varieties? Been there and found at least 50 different mushrooms.
The Pacific Northwest does. I love where we live for that main reason. It's not specifically the watershed. It's all the forests around here. And you just have an eye for finding them. The Redmond watershed is just a beautiful preserve right up there on Novelty. I don't think anything makes it too unique other than it having all of the different ecosystem. It has broadleaf deciduous trees, and it has conifers. So you're going to get every mushroom that you possibly could get at this elevation growing. It's got bogs, it's got the swamp, it's got a creek, it's got rotten trees, you know. But if you go to Farrell McWhirter Park down the road, it's the same thing. Or if you go to the Paradise Lake Conservation area, it's the same way. You'll find the exact same.
Can we see the contact information again?
I'm typing it in the chat window. You'll be receiving it shortly.
Well, there's
Oh,
a
good.
window.
Thank you.
So, Matt?
Yeah.
If people are interested in going out on a foraging expedition with you, how does that happen?
So typically what happens is it year to year changes based on the capabilities and age range of the group and what their specific goal is. I've stopped doing chanterelle specific or like edible specific mushroom hunting. I more so just do this is a habitat you look for and we find chanterelles, because I can't focus on one thing. So it all depends. If I have a group of older people that don't want to go walking through forest land, you know, the Redmond watershed is great. You can just walk on that little tree frog loop and find dozens of species of mushrooms. So it normally works by, if people sit there and email me or call me, I make a waiting list, and then I'll select the day once the mushrooms start popping, hopefully within the next month before it starts freezing. I'm hoping October we get a lot more rain. This rain was definitely needed.
So there's a question from Elizabeth Rutledge who asks, this was great. What mushrooms are out right now? What should I be looking for?
Oyster mushrooms, that is my wife, by the way. Thank you, Elizabeth. Oyster mushrooms are out right now. The chanterelles we found were moldy and somebody clear cut the land that we pick on. But mushrooms are just now starting as far as mushroom season goes. It's just now starting with all the rains. Within the next couple weeks is when you'll see a lot more diversity of mushrooms. But I have seen oysters growing already. I've seen the chicken of the woods growing. Chanterelles, I bet you if you get into a nice wet spot where they don't dry out, you would find some. Pretty much you just got to get out there and look. Related question is, what's the habitat for truffles? That's a secret. No, it's not. It's not. Truffles have a symbiotic relationship with Douglas firs and other conifer trees. Black truffles prefer older, more mature trees, and white truffles tend to be in the same habitat as a chanterelle would be in, so like a middle-aged, 2-foot diameter Douglas fir with salal. And you can spend thousands of dollars on a dog to hunt truffles. hunting and selling mushrooms never was appealing to me, because when I did it for a while, it took the joy away from it. It was no longer me going out to learn and explore. It was me going out to try and make some money, which is fine, but the easiest way to find truffles is in the wintertime. Go snooping around Douglas firs of different ages and look for little dig holes. Our native red squirrels love truffles. And most of the time the truffles are too big for the squirrels to actually take the whole thing out of the hole. So most of my truffles, in fact, the black one in the picture had the nibble marks from a squirrel. And I was walking on the Redmond watershed, and I reached down and grabbed the big, beautiful black truffle out of the hole.
Huh.
So conifers, Christmas tree farms, if you can get the permission from a Christmas tree farm owner, if you get the right habitat, you'll find them there. But specifically conifers, they're doing some work with hazelnuts, but that's not really our area. That's more south in Oregon and stuff. Hey, Grandpa Stab, look at that. You popped up. People are just randomly popping up.
There, I've been up there for a while. You did a good job, man. Proud of you.
Grandpa.
Know a little bit more about mushrooms.
I hope so. That's my goal.
There you go.
A little excitement.
Yeah. I got to get going, so you have a great night, and thanks again.
You
You bet. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so we have a question from Daniel Webb. For chanterelles, you mentioned they are associated with Douglas fir, hemlock sword fir, and salal, but are they also vine maple and Oregon grape?
They do not have a relationship with the Oregon grape or the vine maple specifically. The habitat does. If you find an area that has salal, Douglas fir of the mid-age in sword ferns, you're going to find interspersed vine maples. The relationship isn't with the vine maple, but I think you find them close to the vine maples because of all the leaves that they drop, and they tend to, I don't know, they just tend to grow. You'll find them around the vine maples, but not as far as a symbiotic relationship. The habitat that we described has vine maples in it and Oregon grape. But you have to remember the mycelium can reach for miles. Mycelium underground is an entire network. So even if you find a chanterelle that's by the side of the road, not next to Oregon grape or a Douglas fir or anything, you follow back sooner or later, you will see that there is a Douglas fir, or you go find the right habitat. They don't have to be right next to what they have this symbiotic relationship with. But to my knowledge, no, not vine maple or Oregon grape specifically.
Are you aware of, I'm sorry, there's a couple other questions here. Could you please talk about identifying pine mushrooms, matsutake?
Those are a little more advanced. I don't like them, so I don't go pick them. the way I was taught was, so a pine mushroom has a really aggressive mycelium, and when you pull the mushroom from the ground, it makes a pop sound. The one piece of advice I could give you, if you know what the, it's not truly a plant, but we call it a plant, Indian pipe, it's our ghost pipe. It's a white, pigmentless plant that's a parasite on trees in our area. That's where you'll find the Mycological. Typically riverbeds. Eastern Washington, down by the riverbeds. I found some in the Mount Rainier area, but that's not one that I specifically really go out of my way for. I know that they can at times be worth more than the weight of gold. But because it's something I don't like, I just don't know too much about the specifics. But I've always found them by water, by rivers, underneath pine trees, ponderosa pine, where the ghost pipe had been growing at some point in time.
There's an important question here from Anne Hidema. She says, is there anything we need to know about mushroom hunting and being a good steward and citizen while foraging?
So there is a debate versus picking a mushroom or cutting a mushroom. That has been debunked. As far as just being a good citizen and like mushroom hunting goes, if you're walking through the forest, don't smush other plants on purpose. If you are a member of a mushroom group online and you take a picture of a mushroom that you pulled out of the ground and ask for an ID, people will attack you for it because they think that you're hurting the ecosystem. But in reality, OSU did a research, and there is no maleffect to the ecosystem if you pick a mushroom completely out of the ground or if you cut it. If you're trying to ID a mushroom, you need to pick it completely out of the ground. But the best analogy I've ever heard is just, it's an apple. Think of it as an apple. It's a fruit body. It's there to produce seeds, in this case, spores. And the actual organism is the mycelium underneath the ground. That's the actual tree of the plant, is that mycelial network. So yeah, just don't sit there and step on little shrubs purposefully, and just have fun. Go have that childlike wonder, and you won't be smushing things for no reason. You'll start finding insects fascinating, and yeah, it's all about having fun, getting out and learning something new. The more you can learn, the better off you are, especially about your own surroundings.
Okay, so Nadia also recommends the documentary Fantastic Fungi. She calls it outstanding.
I don't know if I've seen that one. Is that Paul Stamets? I wonder if that's, there is another one that I guess I will recommend, and that's 6 Ways to Save the World with Fungi by Paul Stamets. He's been kind of leading the mushroom, the whole like cult of mushroom, medicinal mushrooms in the Pacific Northwest.
Okay, another question is, are you aware of clubs in the Oregon City area to associate with?
What was that?
Are you aware of groups or clubs like mushroom hunting clubs in the Oregon City area?
No, I'm not, but I guarantee you there are. Oregon is a great place. It's the same habitat as us for the majority. In fact, chanterelles and stuff are better on the coast. I do know that Eugene, Oregon has a chanterelle festival each year. So there are definitely, if you search for mushroom clubs in Oregon, you're gonna find something.
Question. I heard the recommendation for Fantastic Fungi documentary, but then you mentioned something which I didn't quite catch.
Oh, 6 ways to save the world with fungi.
Thank you.
It's a really good documentary, and I went and listened to Paul Stamets speak, but he's doing some pretty groundbreaking things medically with mushrooms against like the flu, and then he's also using certain fungus as insecticides, and other fungus he's using for bioremediation, so removing toxins from the soils. It's a really good little documentary. I think it was a TED Talk. I went and listened to him years ago.
Yeah, I'll look for them.
He's also got a book called Mycelium Running, which is a little bit more in depth of his talk, and that's a really good book. I've read that quite a few times.
And what is his name?
Paul Stamets, Stamets. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And thank you for this talk also. It was really very good.
Oh, I'm glad to hear.
The talk is being recorded, and when we make the announcement for next month's talk, we will send a link to everyone who registered for this talk to the recordings of previous talks, not just this one, but all the ones that we had recorded before as well. So yeah, if you miss something, you just want to go back and look at some of the pictures, take screenshots, you'll be able to do that. Okay. I guess we are not getting any more questions, so we can thank our speaker again. Matthew, thank you for a very interesting talk and informative. And we'll go out there with more knowledge and information when we do our hikes.
That's all I can ask.
And Charlotte or Damaris, do you have any final words you'd like to share?
Thank you, Matt. This was really interesting, and I'm definitely gonna call you about pruning some trees in my yard. I have some fruit trees here. I have a young one too. I don't know what to do with it to help it with its shape. The recording for tonight's talk, I will also share it in the Facebook event under the discussion area, if that is how you found this talk. So it's another way to see the talk again. And then I also, in the Facebook event, Thursday night, there's another talk about how to save the kokanee salmon. And kokanee salmon, they live their adult lives in Lake Sammamish. And they're a local native salmon that needs our help. So we've got a panel through my job. There is a panel discussion about how to save the kokanee. So that info is in the Facebook event for tonight's talk also. So pass it off to Charlotte.
Okay. Well, I just want to again thank Matt. Thank you so much. This was great. We've all been looking forward to learning more about mushrooms, and there is so much.
There is, but if you just take it with fun, it's easy.
Well, you lifted the lid and sort of helped, I think, at least for myself, demystify it a little bit, or at least make it seem like it's possible to really begin to learn more about mushrooms. I'm looking forward to getting out in the woods and beginning to find some of these mushrooms.
Oh, we'll pick a day and we'll go to the watershed.
All right. That's a deal. Thank you everyone for participating. And Matt, thank you. This was a wonderful presentation. It was so interesting.
Thank you. I was glad to share my information.
It was very generous of you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you everyone for attending. We look forward to seeing you at the next time.
Okay, Matt.
Have a good evening.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.